the name of the Creator, Redeemer and Sanctifier. Amen. Please be seated. Knock, knock. Yeah. Goliath. Goliath down, you looketh tired. Come on, that was good. I got show and tell today. We have a new microphone. I'm struggling with not breathing into it. Do I need to bring it all the way down to the back? It's St Paul's, London. We picked this up. I'm hoping it survived. I spilled coffee on it this morning because I was tired. But it's like a drawing of a cross-section of St Paul's, London. And on this side are some of our photos of it. Because, we've been there, so we're bragging now. So that's... all the cheap seats at the back, can see it now? No, I haven't known the bells there. I didn't know I was allowed to ring the bells here. The reason I brought that in is I brought it in because Brenda and I have very different opinions of St Paul's, London. I love it. I think it's a brilliant building, and for a whole bunch of reasons which I could tell you afterwards and wax lyrical about for ages, and you'll get bored, and I'm not going to do that. Bren's not a fan of St Paul's at all. Architecturally, it's an interesting building, it's a nice big building, all of that sort of stuff. But she's not a huge fan of the building for one particular reason, and that is that when you go in and you stand under the dome, I love it because when you stand under the dome you look up and you are insignificant. And the whole building's designed to remind you that you are a speck. In the face of God, you are nothing. Bren's not a fan because you stand at that exact same spot, you look up, and on all the pillars is they've put all this gold work. There's like the wealth of it, the expense of it, the money of it is just absolutely on display, and you can't miss it. And I wouldn't want it in my home. It's a little ostentatious, but Bren's question the first time we went there together was to stand there and look at it and say, how do you get from the carpenter to this? And I've got to say, I understand that. I understand that question thoroughly, and there's a big part of me that agrees with it, particularly when we read today's gospel reading. If you want to be great, you've got to become the slave of all. How do you get from the slave of all to gold etched on the walls of the building? It's a difficult connection to make, isn't it? I wonder how they're preaching on it this morning in St Paul's, London, or in any of the great cathedrals of the world. I don't want to speak today so much about a slave of all. You've all heard lots of sermons on it, right? Throughout your life, and there's plenty of opportunities to talk about it throughout the year, throughout the church's year. Instead today, what I want to speak about is a little bit of that history of how you get from slave of all to grand buildings like that. And I want to end with, where are we at today as a church? In the early 300s, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the last 1700 years of history. In the early 300s, Constantine converts to Christianity, and that act dramatically changes the nature of Christianity and the world itself. We enter a period of what we call Christendom, in which the church, Christianity, becomes the official religion of the empire. And And that's a huge change. The moment Constantine's converted, he ceases persecution of the church. The church goes from huddled in homes, or when they happen to, own property in the past that had just been confiscated. It goes from this place of suppression and hiding almost to becoming free. Buildings are given back to the churches when they've been confiscated. If you wanted to advance in the empire, you became the same religion as the emperor. Constantine's just converted to Christianity. Guess what a whole bunch of the bigwigs did? They converted to Christianity. The world has dramatically changed. And after Constantine, this time of Christendom, becoming a good Christian becomes synonymous with being a good citizen. The two become inextricably linked, almost inseparably linked. So there's two big questions I think we need to ask ourselves about this period of Christendom. The first is, what's the task of the people of the church under Christendom? The task of the church became really simple. You had to be a good citizen. You had to pray for the priest, of which us clergy were very grateful. You had to put enough money in the plate to support both the priest and the missionaries. And that brings us to the second question. Under Christendom, where does mission happen? If everyone in the empire is now a Christian, where does mission work happen? It happens out there, on the edge of the empire. And where's the edge of the empire? Well, if we want to speak of the English Empire, let's take that period of history. Where did it happen? Deepest, darkest Africa. You went to convert the natives in Africa, or you went to India where they hadn't heard the gospel, or you had to come all the way to Australia and find the Aborigines, or to New Zealand and find the Maoris, the native peoples, and often the missionaries walked a step behind the army. As the army went forth and conquered, so the missionaries came a step behind converting. And you turned them into not just good Christians, well, what was a good Christian, but a good citizen. So you taught them to be good citizens, and so when England sent out their missionaries with their army, you had to convert the Aborigines, for instance, not just to Christianity, but you had to make them good English people, or attempt to, and then they could be considered good Christians. And Christendom lasts for a long time, and it served the church very well. And it's Christendom that led to buildings like St. Paul's, big civic buildings as much as they are religious buildings. You talk about the power St. Paul's had as a symbol for England during World War II and the Blitz. It's as much a civic building as it was a religious building. And Christendom serves the church well, very well. The church expands and covers the whole earth, or almost the whole earth, during that time. But that's not the time you and I live in. Christendom's been dying for a long time. There's a lot of debate about exactly whether or not it is completely dead, or whether it's still dying, and when did it start dying, and when did it... Some say the Reformation, some say the Enlightenment, some say the rise of the secular state, where the moment the apparatus of the state becomes divorced from the apparatus of the church, then you've got Christendom starting to die. Some commentators would say it lasted all the way up to World War II and the end of colonialism. I don't want to get into the debate of exactly when it ended, other than to say this: you and I know that it's dying. There's vestiges of it around, absolutely. Our prayer book has a whole bunch of ideas in it that are still hangovers of Christendom. But by and large, Christendom, we are living in what we call a post-Christendom era. So no longer do you need to be a good Christian to be a good citizen, or vice versa. In fact, today we might make the argument that sometimes being a good citizen is at odds with being a good Christian. And we might say that when we look at things like the Christians who are so strong in their beliefs and convictions that they protest against families and children being detained on Nauru and going to jail for that belief. That's not being a good citizen, is it? Protesting the government and getting yourself arrested. But we might say that it is a good Christian stance to take. So we don't live in the Christendom era anymore. What do those two questions mean for us? How do we answer those two questions in this era we find ourselves in? First up, what's the task of the people? It's no longer just to sit in the pews, pray for the priest and give money to the missions. Don't get me wrong, I'm still grateful if you pray for us as clergy. Please, don't stop. And certainly I'm not upset if you put money in the plate to support the missions and the work. But it is no longer your only role as the people of the church. The task of the people of the church is now to recapture some of that spirit of the early church and to become actively involved in the work of the church. Why? Because of the second question, or rather the answer to it. Where does mission happen now in the church? It's not on the edge of the empire, because the moment you walk out this door today, you're going to find a lot of people who aren't Christian, who have very little connection with Christianity. The work of mission no longer happens in deepest, darkest Africa or in the far-flung outback with the Aboriginal missions anymore. It does happen in those places, but the mission happens the moment you walk out this door, because you'll encounter plenty of people who haven't heard the gospel. I don't want to do the numbers because it might scare us a little, but I wonder how many people will go to a cafe this morning or this weekend rather than go to any form of worship. Let's not do the numbers, we might scare ourselves. We need a sign. We need a sign right back there above the exit sign, and I even have one made up for you. I need a great big sign that says, "You are now entering your mission field." No longer are you entering the mission field when you join up to be a missionary and go to all those places. You are becoming a missionary simply by walking out those two doors. Mission doesn't happen simply by the professionals anymore. We are all called to be missionaries. Priests have to change the way that they've been working. For close to 1,500 years, priests have fulfilled the role of chaplain. We've been chaplain to the faithful. And now we're recapturing that early church idea, and we have to become enablers of mission, not simply chaplains to the faithful. Here's where we connect with today's gospel reading. I think for the longest time under Christendom we lost sight of what it was to be a servant. We also lost sight of what it was to tell people the gospel. We didn't have to. Our neighbours were Christian. They might have been different denominations, but they were pretty much all Christian. Now we find ourselves in a society with less and less Christians around us. We find ourselves with people who have never heard the gospel. When Bren started work in Thuringowa at the council there, she worked with this small team of 4 of them. It was an odd engineering team because there was 3 women and one man. So, it was nice to see the guys in the minority for a change. And I remember she came home and she told me the story. We were heading up to Ingham for an induction, the new priest up in Ingham. And she wasn't sure, what do I wear? I just go, well, whatever I've got, put it on and I'm ready. Brent couldn't decide, so she took in 3 outfits to work and she laid them out at lunchtime, and she said to the other 2 girls, she said, what do I wear? Well, what are you going to? And she said, it's a church service up at Ingham. And they looked at her choices and they said, well, you can't wear any of them. That's a tank top. You can't wear a tank top to church. That one's a rock and roll t-shirt. You can't wear that to church. I can't remember what the third one was, but there was a problem with it too. And she said to them, what do you think I wear to church? And they thought she wore, the shirts that get buttoned up to here with sleeves down to here and long skirts down to the ankles. And they had no clue. They had never been to church in their life. Early 30s, late 20s, and they had never walked in the door of a church in their whole life. Not even for a friend's baptism or confirmation, nothing. No connection whatsoever. Our mission field happens the moment we walk out this door because Christendom is dead. We've got the vestiges of it, like these grand, beautiful buildings. Absolutely. But it's our job in this new world to tell the gospel to others. And yes, it starts by being a servant to others. That's what Jesus was saying to us. Now, in the next couple of weeks, when I'm preaching again, I'm going to go on with this because I want to talk about the next step. It's one thing to show the gospel in action, but we need to learn to speak of it. If we don't speak of it, people will never hear. But for now, I just want you to get your head around this idea that we are missionaries. The moment we walk out this door, each and every one of us is a missionary in a mission field. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.